On a quiet morning in 1991, in a small coastal town, where the sea was both a lifeline and a constant threat, a young boy woke up before the sun. He quietly packed his fishing gear, slid his small wooden boat into the calm water, and turned to wave at the shore. His smile, bright and confident, would become a memory frozen in time, the last image anyone had of him. He was young, but he knew the ocean, raised by its tides. He could read the currents and interpret the sky. That morning felt completely normal. The water was still, the air was clear, and there were no warnings of an approaching storm. It was just another simple fishing trip, or so everyone thought. But as the hours ticked by and the sun climbed higher in the sky, the boy didn't return. A ripple of unease spread through the close-knit community. Families began to worry, and soon, other boats set out to search for him. His name echoed across the water, a desperate call into the vast emptiness. Seasoned fishermen scanned the horizon, hoping for a sign. The authorities were called in, and what started as a local concern quickly escalated into a full-scale search and rescue operation. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their blades chopping the salty air. Divers plunged into the depths, exploring the seabed for any clue. The Coast Guard meticulously traced possible drift paths, calculating where the currents might have taken him. But there was nothing. No splintered wood from a broken boat, no tangled fishing net, no sign of a struggle. Just the endless, empty water. Days bled into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The initial frantic hope began to drain away, replaced by a heavy, gnawing grief. The town held vigils and prayer services, their collective sorrow hanging in the air. The boy's family waited, every knock on the door, every ringing phone, a jolt of hope and fear. But the sea remained silent, guarding its secrets. Eventually, the official search was called off. The boy was declared lost at sea, presumed dead. Life, as it always does, forced itself to move forward. But the wound never truly healed. His parents kept his room untouched, a shrine to the son who never came home. Faded missing posters, with his smiling face and a description of his boat, lingered on old notice boards, a ghostly reminder of the town's shared loss. And every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, someone would stand on the shore, look out at the horizon, and wonder. Then, 22 years later, everything changed. In a place far, far away from that small coastal town, on a remote shoreline thousands of miles across the ocean, something washed ashore after a powerful tide. Locals noticed an old weathered boat, its wood scarred by decades of salt and sun. It looked ancient, like a relic from another time, but there was something odd about it. It just didn't belong there. The authorities were alerted. As they examined the strange vessel, they discovered markings burned into the wood. They were faded, almost illegible, but they could still be read. The registration style was one that hadn't been used for over 2 decades. And then they saw it, carved carefully near the bow. A name. It was the same name listed in the missing person records from 1991. Investigators froze. This was impossible. It couldn't be a coincidence, and it certainly wasn't a replica. Scientific analysis of the wood confirmed it was from the right era. The construction style perfectly matched the kind of boats built in that specific region. But the most staggering revelation came from ocean scientists. They concluded that it was physically impossible for a small wooden boat like this to survive drifting freely in the open ocean for 22 years. It would have been destroyed by storms, battered by waves, or simply disintegrated over time. This boat hadn't just been drifting. It had been maintained. Inside the vessel, the story became even more incredible. They found remnants of tools. They saw handmade repairs, done skillfully over a long period. Knots had been tied and retied. These were clear signs of survival, not abandonment. Someone had been living on this boat, caring for it, keeping it afloat against all odds. The discovery of the ghost boat reignited the cold case, capturing the world's attention. Media crews descended on the remote beach. Experts from various fields began to argue over the possibilities. Some theorists suggested the boy might have survived, shipwrecked on one of the thousands of remote, uninhabited islands in the vast ocean, using the fishing skills his father had taught him to stay alive. Others spun a different tale. Perhaps he was picked up by a passing ship, a freighter, or a private yacht, and for some reason, lived a hidden life, unable or unwilling to return home. Was he held captive? Did he suffer from amnesia, or did he choose to disappear? Oceanographers went to work, mapping complex current models that showed potential long, looping journeys across entire oceans, proving that such a voyage, while improbable, wasn't entirely impossible with human intervention. Psychologists studied cases of long-term isolation, trying to understand what a human mind endures when cut off from the world for so long. For the family, the news was a tidal wave of conflicting emotions. The boat meant he had survived, at least for a while. It was a miracle. But the fact that he wasn't with it brought back all the grief and uncertainty, opening old wounds. Hope and pain were now tangled together. DNA tests were conducted on items found in the boat, confirming its origin. Analysis of barnacle growth on the hull suggested the boat had spent significant time near coastlines, not just drifting in the deep ocean. This meant repeated contact with land over the years. But one final detail shocked everyone to their core. A recent repair found on the boat's hull was dated to just a few months before it washed ashore. This meant someone had been alive, maintaining that boat far more recently than anyone could have ever imagined. The boy, now a man in his 30s, might still be out there. The investigation was officially reopened. International alerts were sent out. Police questioned remote island communities, asking if they'd ever seen a stranger matching his description. Old fishermen in distant ports recalled rumors from years past. Stories of a quiet, solitary man who lived on his boat. A man who refused to give a name and always avoided official ports. But these were just whispers. Fragments of stories with no concrete evidence to back them up. Nothing solid ever surfaced. The boy's family aged, carrying a flicker of hope that never fully died, a hope that was both a comfort and a curse. And the world was left with a mystery that defies logic. The sea, after 22 years, gave back the boat. But it kept the boy. To this day, there is no grave. There is no final proof of death. There are only questions. This story reminds us that sometimes, the ocean doesn't just take lives, it hides them. It conceals incredible stories of survival, resilience, and mystery. It teaches us that disappearance is not always the end. Sometimes, it's just a pause in the story, waiting for the truth to finally catch up. As investigators dug deeper into the mystery, details that were once ignored suddenly felt important. Old fishermen remembered seeing a small, unidentified boat far out at sea weeks after the boy's disappearance, but they had dismissed it at the time. A retired Coast Guard officer recalled a mysterious vessel briefly appearing on radar years later, only to vanish again. These fragments, once meaningless, now felt like pieces of a larger, more complex puzzle. Experts started recreating the boy's possible routes using modern technology. Their simulations showed that with careful navigation and island hopping, survival was not only possible but highly likely for someone who was raised on the sea. Survival specialists explained how a determined fisherman could live for years off fish, rainwater, and coconuts, constantly repairing his boat with scavenged materials. He could have been avoiding major ports out of fear, trauma, or the belief that returning home after so long would only reopen old wounds. Psychologists added another layer to this theory, suggesting the boy may have grown into a man who no longer recognized the world he had left behind. He might have been carrying the heavy burden of guilt for surviving when everyone he knew believed he was dead. This theory struck a deep chord, because it painted a picture of a man watching the world move on from a distance, choosing a life of silence over a reunion he could no longer face. Meanwhile, the family wrestled with a storm of impossible emotions. There was relief in the idea that he might have lived, but also anger that he never returned, and a profound fear that searching for him again would only end in another crushing silence. Journalists began to uncover similar cases from around the world, fishermen lost at sea for decades, castaways who survived in quiet solitude, men who returned home unrecognizable, or not at all. Each story made the mystery feel more human and more painful. It became clear that the boat washing ashore was not a miracle ending. It was a message, a piece of irrefutable proof that life had continued somewhere far beyond the horizon. Oceanographers confirmed the final journey of the boat was deliberate. It had been guided toward land by someone who understood the tides and the wind, almost as if the vessel was sent home when its owner no longer could make the journey. That idea haunted everyone involved, because it suggested intention, a desire for closure, or perhaps, a final goodbye. Years passed after the boat's discovery. The leads dried up, the sightings faded, and the case once again slipped into the realm of uncertainty. But the story never truly ended. Because somewhere between the disappearance and the discovery lies a truth that is still waiting to surface. And until it does, the boy remains both lost and alive in the world's collective memory. Even decades later, the mystery continued to ripple outward in quiet ways. It inspired researchers, filmmakers, and ordinary people to revisit the case again and again. There was something so deeply human about it, the idea that a boy could vanish into the vastness of the sea and yet leave behind a tangible trace so many years later. New information began to trickle in. Villagers on distant, remote islands started sharing old stories they had once dismissed as rumors. They spoke of a lone fisherman who would appear seasonally, trade his catch for tools, speak very little, and then disappear before anyone could ask too many questions. The descriptions of this man varied, but his age and his solitary habits aligned closely enough to keep a fragile hope alive. Authorities followed these leads cautiously. They were well aware of how easily imagination can grow around grief. Yet they couldn't ignore how often such rumors emerged from a kernel of truth. As technology advanced, satellite mapping improved, allowing analysts to re-examine old shipping logs. They discovered gaps where unidentified small vessels might have passed through completely unnoticed. And still, the central question remained unanswered. Why did he never return? Some believed the answer lay in fear, the fear of facing parents who had mourned for decades. The fear of being blamed, or the fear of realizing that the home he remembered no longer existed. Psychologists noted that long-term isolation can change a person's identity so profoundly that returning to a former life can feel impossible. Others believed the sea itself had become his home, that the boy grew into a man who understood tides better than he understood time, and ultimately chose the freedom of the ocean over a reunion on land. And then there were the darker theories, that he had survived for many years, only to perish later, sending his boat back intentionally as a final act. A way of saying, I lived, I tried. Remember me not as a tragedy, but as a survivor. And that idea, more than any other, is the one that stayed with people. It transformed the story from one of pure loss into a powerful narrative of endurance. Eventually, the family spoke publicly. They said they were no longer searching for certainty, but for peace. They had come to accept that the boat was both an answer and a question, proof of life, and proof of an enduring mystery. Today, the boat rests preserved in a small museum. Its cracked wood and careful, makeshift repairs tell a story without using any words. It reminds everyone who sees it that some truths arrive late and incomplete, but they still matter. They change how we understand fate, survival, and the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit. If this story stayed with you, stirred your curiosity, or made you look at the sea a little differently like this video, share it with someone who loves true mysteries and subscribe for more real stories that time has not yet finished telling.